Thank you all for being here. And I also want to thank our friends, the Brodskys, for supporting tonight, sponsoring tonight to make tonight happen. For joining me in celebrating them. Great leaders in our community and visionaries for Jewish education. And actually, Dr. Brodsky recently published a book around bridging divides in times of polarization, which I recommend. So tonight is the question, what is heroism for American Jews today? What is heroism for American Jews? We've already started a conversation about what heroism is to us personally, and looking at this moment and reflecting upon our Jewish history and forward to our Jewish future. Let me tell you about our scholar today, who just arrived from Israel today. Rav Mike Feuer is an educator, content creator, and spiritual counselor. He teaches and inspires people around the world through his Jewish Story History podcast, which you can check out, and the newly launched Jewish Heroism Project. Whether working through teaching, content, or narrative therapy, Rav Mike's mission is always the same: to tell a story of the past that upholds a present identity fit to build the future of which we dream. And please join me in welcoming Rabbi Mike Feuer.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shmuley. So we really have two things that we need to do tonight. One is to talk about American Jewry, and where, at least from someone who came and still sees himself as part of American Jewry, but lives now kind of on the side. I have been living in Israel for the last 22 years. So we need to talk a little bit about that. And then we need to talk about heroism, and the two really go together because we have to give a definition. As a couple of people noted during our conversation at dinner, we started talking about heroism, but we didn't actually define the thing. So those are the two pieces I'd like to do. Here, I don't know if anybody was here. It was here a year ago, and our conversation was about the future of American Zionism. Right, and it was in light of the judicial reform and a lot of the sort of tension between democracy and it. I actually wanted to call the class originally from Ben Gurion to Ben Gvir, but I got voted down. But the reason I mention is because how things have changed, and yet in many ways they've stayed exactly the same, which is that we're people struggling to stand together in the face of conflicts, which, like most conflicts, are internal and external. And we can have a debate about whether it's the internal driving and the external that's an expression, or the external. We don't need to have that right now. But it's a privilege to be here again, and I'm excited to think about American Jewry as a whole, because it's very important to me in light of having focused on Zionism, last time we were here, to remember that the divisions within American Jewry don't mean that there's more than one American Jewry out there. It just means that there are different facets. So instead of focusing on one, I really want to keep that on the table. But first things first, my thesis, if you will, is that American Jewry has gone through basically three phases. There was a survival phase. And you could begin that wherever you like. I mean, you can begin it well before the Holocaust. I mean, you could say that the Jews washed up on the shores of America, just like we washed up on the shores of so many other places. And there was a period of building and acceptance, et cetera. But at least in the modern last, say 100, to 75 to 100 years, there was a survival era. Post-Holocaust in particular, there was a need to somehow put the pieces back together. And then there's been an era of tremendous integration and prosperity, right? And one way or another, we are in a new era. And I would say that in the survival era, as we spoke about last year, the primary strategy of American Jewry was safety and diversity. Right? This idea of safety and diversity, that hate against one is hate against all, and that if the Jews can lead in creating a culture of tolerance within the United States as a whole, that will be good for the Jews. And I don't believe that has changed necessarily, but yesterday's strategies are not always fit to today's challenges, right? So that was the sort of survival strategy. The second phase of prosperity, the strategy was integration, go mainstream. It's a very unique move, historically speaking, for the Jewish people. To be a Jew on some level is to swim upstream. And yet to be an American Jew for the last 50 years has been to swim into the mainstream, which is why a lot of American Jews are very troubled by what's happening today. They did, but let's not mistake, for all the sort of golden age sort of painting of that, anti-Semitism was a political capital from the mid-19th century. So yes, they succeeded to an extent that no other Jewish community had before them, but not in the way in which American Jewry has, but it's fair enough. So the unique needs to be toned down there. The question is what now? And what I want to offer to you is that the stance, the model of identity, the approach to education that I would encourage American Jewry to take is heroism, which of course then begs the question, what's a hero? And specifically, what's a Jewish hero, right? Now, I don't want to put anybody on edge. That doesn't mean that it's an exclusionary definition. But if the Jews are going to think about what the Jews need to do, even if it's in service of the whole world, I would encourage them to think about how to do it as Jews. We're inheritors of a tremendous tradition. And I'm not going to actually go in depth to the source sheet that you have in front of you, even though it doesn't look like a traditional source sheet. I handed it out basically as an invitation that people should take the question a little bit further, because what this does is it maps out a path. It's one I use in my counseling practice with individuals. It's one that has been developed into a seminar that works with groups, and it's one that I'm working right now to develop into a curriculum that I can actually share with institutions, because I have a deep belief that people can trot a path of heroism. And even if you don't become Superman or Wonder Woman or whomever was your favorite comic book character growing up, at the end of it, you can be something more. Right? And so we may or may not refer to the sheet. We'll see when we get to it, but please take it home. The website's down in the lower corner there on the left. There are videos and source sheets that will allow people to access this information at their own pace. What do we call that? Asynchronous learning, right? I never had any training in teaching, despite the fact that that's actually what I do with most of my time. Okay. So before we get into the definition, I do also want to note that there are many models of heroism. The rabbi, whose name I actually didn't catch previously, said that we're in this time in the Omer of netzach and gvura, of victory and strength, and that's very sort of appropriate for heroism. It's appropriate for one model of heroism. But I want to make sure that we don't narrow our focus. And at the end, I want to consider what I think are maybe 2 or 3 models that the American Jewry in particular can pursue. But just to point out, I mean, yes, the gibor, the warrior, is a model, but the healer is just as much a classic model of Jewish heroism through time and in Torah as the warrior, as is the storyteller, in my humble opinion, the most important Jewish hero, for many, many reasons. And there are others, the righteous, the matmid, the one who plugs away continually, etc. Right? And the power of having multiple models means that there are many ways to be a hero. But all heroes fit into a particular definition, and they all are on a quest. And if I do nothing else tonight, I want to convince you to begin a quest in your own life, in the lives of your communities, and to the extent that you feel like you are part of a larger American Jewry. It's a quest to become the people that we need to be in the time which we've been given to be that people. Right? Because a quest-driven life is one with purpose and power and meaning, and can draw out from us the aspects of self which would otherwise really lay dormant. So, first of all, like I said, we need to have a definition. There's this Torah's heroic journey. It's a very impressive phrase of Jewish Heroism Project, the Torah's heroic journey. Not to be too reductionist, but we have to define Torah. This is something I found in my research, and I have no idea how many hours in the last year delving into the question of what is the Torah's perspective on heroism. First of all, does anybody know where the word Torah comes from? Excellent. Who said that? Right. But it's a very specific type of teaching. Hora'ah is practical instruction. Meaning the Torah is rarely about abstract concepts. We were speaking about this earlier, right? You would struggle to find philosophy, theology, right? The sort of systematic thoughts on God and being and metaphysics and all that stuff doesn't appear in the Jewish canon in any systematic sense until the 10th century of the Common Era. The Torah is about practical instruction. What do you do? And in that sense, it's a very powerful vehicle for heroism, because heroes act. That's something which defines them. They're not just on a quest. They're called to action. But do you know what else the Torah is? It's an aperture. An aperture. once upon a time, I think almost everybody in the audience can appreciate the fact that cameras actually were a little hole that let the light of the world in. Right? I just have to say that one of my daughters asked me why her iPhone goes when she takes a picture. Oh. Right? But what is an aperture? An aperture takes the grandeur of light and narrows it down to a very intense little focus. Right? But then what does it do? It allows us to actually see a picture. Right? People know what camera obscura is. Right? If you were going to stand inside of a refrigerator box, which my mom always told me, do not do this at home, right? If you're going to stand inside of a refrigerator box when it was totally dark, and you pulled a pin out of your pocket and you poked a hole in the wall, just a tiny little pinhole, do you know what you'd see on the wall behind you? An image of the world. That's an aperture. And it has to be narrow, because if I cut a big hole, all I get is a spot of light. Why that is, we're not going to go into the physics or perhaps the metaphysics of it for now, but I want you to appreciate the metaphor. The Torah is a tiny aperture through which the light of the infinite shines. It's not just practical instruction, which it absolutely is, and you're totally correct about the etymological, but sometimes, meaning trumps etymology in Torah, right? It's an aperture for light, and you know what else is an aperture for light? Each and every one of you. There's only one light, but there are an infinite number of openings. So the Torah is both practical instruction and an aperture through which the light of the infinite shines. And you put the two together, you know what that does? It makes a people. It shapes consciousness. The Torah is a story that creates its readers. On some level, that's really all it is. We can take metaphysics out of it. It's a story that creates its readers. People that have this obsession about this story, and they do all kinds of stuff. I was in LAX this morning, laying tefillin, right? Wrapping my, what do they call them? Phylacteries. I don't even know what that means. Right? That's an action that shapes your consciousness. Trust me. It's, by the way, second only to standing naked in public, as far as like, what on earth am I doing right now? Right? But it's a very powerful impact, not just on the world around you. We could debate that, but on your consciousness, it's unquestionable. This is the way Torah works. It shapes individuals, it shapes consciousness, and it shapes the world through both. It's behavioral guidance, it's stories, it's the lived historical reality of the Jews of Am Yisrael, right? It's a training manual, right? That readies us to build the vessels that can bring that infinite down into the actionable. And this is always the job of the hero, right? I'll probably mention his name further later, but Joseph Campbell, if you are familiar with who Joseph Campbell is, he was the great scholar of myth, right? His book, Hero with 1,000 Faces, Hero with 1,000 Faces is foundational, by the way, not just to our understanding of myth, but actually today to the understanding of marketing and most decent movies that you watch. You can't be any screenwriters in the room. Oh, good. So I can say whatever I want. Right? You basically can't do screenwriting without having a basic understanding of Campbell's notion of the hero's journey, right? And one of the things that he teaches. Now, why did I mention Campbell? I got just off on that tangent of the into the actionable. Is that a hero is always called to action. A hero goes out into the infinite and acts to bring a piece of that back into the world which we know, right? So the Torah has a heroic face. It has a heroic face. And if we want to learn to see it, and this is my last piece before we actually get into some substantive definitions, then what we need is to learn to hear its voice, and specifically its mythic voice. Its mythic voice, the mythic voice. Now, some depends on the crowd. Sometimes I say the mythic voice of the Torah, people go, ooh. Sometimes they want to throw things at me. Because people have a found misconception about what myth is. First of all, let's say what it's not. Myth is not the opposite of fact. Right? It's also not a bunch of stories that people used to believe that we all learned about in high school. Right? Myth is the tool that humanity uses when trying to engage truths that are too large to be squeezed into pedantic factuality. Right? Now, a story has to have specifics because nobody ever cared about a story about someone who went somewhere and did something. Right? The specifics are what make a story real and graspable, but they're also what makes it inaccessible, because the specifics of a story told in 6th century before the Common Era China, what on earth does that have to do with me? Except, you know what? Anybody ever read 19th century Russian literature? No? Come on, people, broaden your horizons. Right? Anybody here ever read a good novel? Yeah. Was it true? I see. No, yeah, it's a trick question. It's got to be a trick question, right?
Based on a true story.
Right. Okay. It doesn't go on the nonfiction shelf. It goes on the fiction shelf, right? At the same time, I promise you, if it impacted you, there were truths of human experience in it. Right? That's what we mean when we speak about literature that matters to us. Right? And I will tell you that the distinction between what's called the literal and the literary faces of truth is a non-Jewish distinction. The Torah is not at all interested in your issues with factuality, despite the efforts of the 19th and 20th century to convince you otherwise. History itself, which I'm not going to dive into, it's a whole other side of the work that I do in the Jewish story. History itself is a Greek concept. The Torah is interested in truth and will employ whatever tools are necessary to help you access it. Sometimes the facts are very helpful in knowing the truth. And you know what? Sometimes they get in the way. Now, that's a dicey proposition, I realize, but that's what I mean when I say that there's a mythic voice. And here's the thing, you have to learn to hear it. You have to be willing to listen. You have to learn to hear it. And if you can learn to hear that voice, what Carl Jung, who was the inspiration and teacher, in fact, of Joseph Campbell, if you're familiar with how the modern understanding of heroism has evolved, what Carl Jung spoke about as the collective unconsciousness, right? The unconscious, sorry, right? It's basically the shared real estate of the human psyche, right? There's this vast pool of human experience, which on some level, we all inherit, and it gives itself voice. And leaving theology aside, because I know too much about the Jews to ask us to agree on theology. Remember, as I said, it only appeared in our canon in the 10th century. So as far as I'm concerned, but leaving the theology aside, I don't need to go into that, because everybody here shares in a story, which, just like the light that shines through each person, can find a voice in your life. And there is no more powerful vehicle for that than heroism. So we should probably talk about heroism at this point, because otherwise we're going to run out of time, right? Okay. I just want you to remember that myth is the vessel that the soul creates in order to hold truths which are too large to be squeezed into pedantic factuality. So one example, just instead of speaking only in highfalutin terms, the whole world, but particularly the Jewish people, lived through something tremendous on Simchat Torah on October 7th. Now, one of the ways we deal with that is we want to know what happened. And that question is yet to be answered in very profound and important ways. But we also want to know what to do about it. Remember, Hora'ah? But we also need to fit it into a story. There has to be some mythic frame. For some people, it's the struggle between good and evil, right? Right now in Israel, there's a language that floats around. I have 2 daughters who are in the army right now. And when I dropped off my 19-year-old at the recruitment station, or the induction center, I should say more properly, 3 weeks after the war started, right? It was all, yalla, yalla, right? Come on, people. You're the generation of victory, right? I don't know if you know where that phrase comes from, but it was from the address of the Southern Command to the ground troops right before they entered the Gaza Strip. And he said, the eyes of the whole world are on you. Jewish people, people of Nir Oz and Kfar Aza, the whole world is watching, and you are the generation of victory. Now, agree, disagree, love it, hate it, that's a mythic frame. And the power that this commander gave to his troops by placing them basically within a legend is unspeakable. We cannot hold events of the size of October 7th without a mythic frame. I promise that on some level, each of us has constructed one. And sometimes we're not so happy with the one that we've built because we weren't necessarily prepared, especially with such a traumatic experience. That's what I mean when I say that these mythic frames are the ways in which we hold truths that are too large to squeeze into the facts. Okay. Definition. Because, earlier, as I said, we were speaking about heroes, but we didn't define what a hero is, and that's always a risky business. Although I think in many ways I heard, of course, I already had a definition in mind, but I heard many of the pieces of the work that I've been doing. The basic definition, in my humble opinion, of a hero in the Torah is Mesirut Nefesh L'Ma'an Tov. Let's pick those words apart. Mesirut Nefesh, limsor is to hand something over. And the Nefesh is, let's say, the vital force. In terms of the Jewish understanding of soul, it's where the tire hits the road. Excuse me. Whatever transcendental or existential or theological thoughts you may have about soul, this is what makes things work. Mesirut Nefesh, anybody know how it's usually translated in common language? Well, for the betterment of others is already an assumption, but yeah, you're giving over yourself. It's often translated as self-sacrifice. I would say that that's a limited aspect of what it is. And the way I like to translate it is going beyond or growing beyond your limited self. It can come through the form of self-sacrifice. That can be, right? But it's not necessarily so, right? Growing beyond your limited self for the sake of tov, for good. Now, I want you to notice that there's no definite article there. I did not say hatov, right? Because it makes me very nervous when people put definite articles on words like good. Right? It also makes me nervous when people put them on words like Torah. There's a very different reading. People don't know what the ethics of the fathers are. Right? Classic section of the Mishnah. Anybody tell me what the first Mishnah in the ethics of our fathers are? The famous chain of attribution. How's it start? Anybody know? No, that's much later on, but it's an important one. Right? Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Moshe received what?
Oh.
Yeah, but you know what it doesn't say? It doesn't say the Torah. And that's the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was extremely careful and certainly knew the difference between something with a definite article and one without. Right? So when I say Tov, it's in that sense of Torah, right? Tov is a elusive, and we're not going to spend the time now to define it in its entirety, but I will just point out that whatever it is, it's the backbeat of creation. Right? It's the backbeat of creation. If you open up the first chapter of the Torah, everything's good. Now, there was a lot of talk about preschool teachers earlier, elementary school teachers. Who remembers either giving to their students or themselves answering the summer essay question, how was your summer? Now, if you were a teacher in 5th grade, let's say, and you got back an essay that said, my summer was good, I did a lot of good things, we went to a lot of good places, we had a good time, what would you do? What would you do?
Yeah.
Oh man, failing, that's a tough, I want to go to somebody else's class. At the very least, you give them back and say, tell me something that means something. And the tov, what is it? And yet we see that this so bland and ambiguous word is literally the backbeat of creation. God created light and it was good. The heavens and earth, that was good. And the water, it's all good. And said, no, at the end we get, it's very good. Thank you so much. Right? And so what we discover is that whatever tov means, that's how God sees creation. Remember this notion of the aperture, of the light shining through? That imagine if you could see the world like God saw it. And it's all good.
Until the second creation.
Well, until the second creation, and then what? And then there's a potential for evil. And then this whole human thing and the snake and the Adam and Chava, and it gets a little bit messy. At the same time, apparently that's all good too. Because just because human perspective comes in, and you might say that the first chapter of the Torah is cosmology. The second one is, let's say, anthropology, and the third one is psychology. I'll let you go back and read the first 3 chapters of the Torah now, and from that perspective. But God's perspective doesn't go away. It just ceases to be the center of the story. We all know how that works, right? Once I'm in the room, I'm the hero of the story. Welcome to my movie, right? That we all are the hero of our own story, and that is the way it should be, so long as we're all in the service of good, not the good, because then we can start to fight about what the good is. Mine, not yours, right? But if it's in the service of good, we all become an aperture for one thing, which is going to appear profoundly different, perhaps, in my life than in yours. That's fine. In the same way as if I'm in that refrigerator box and I poke a hole here and I poke a hole there, the picture is going to be very different. The light is the same. Right? So heroism in the Torah is mesirut nefesh l'ma'an tov, going beyond, growing beyond limited self for the goodness of creation, which is in potential, and the human ability is to actualize it through our actions. I'm going to let that definition rest there. Trust me when I tell you that I've spent a lot of time, and if you're looking here at the sheet I've handed out, that you'll see that tov is the first step, but this is a path that has to be cultivated. And as is true with all growth and learning, it's not easy. But, neither is anything worthwhile. The other thing I would add is that you'll notice the arrow there. It's hard to create depth without tremendous work. And the truth of the matter is my graphic artist ripped to shreds what I originally created and redid it right before I left. God bless. He was like, you cannot go to America with what you just created. So he put this together amazingly fast. We thank you to if people are ever looking for a good graphic artist who does web work, you let me know. He's the best. Anyway, you'll notice that it's a cycle, because one of the other things that Joseph Campbell says is that hero stories are never one chapter, right? The hero goes and fights his way over the mountain pass, and when he's done, he's ready to face the dragon on the other side. But what has he done in overcoming the mountain pass? He's transformed into the person who is now capable of picking up the path toward the dragon, right? It's what Campbell calls a constant coming of age, right? It's an iterative process. The heroic journey is a cycle through which you pass. You come out at the end as a new you, not complete because we're all human, right? But that new you is then able to pick up the path once again and continue to grow and to go again further on the quest. The quest is for the goodness of creation. That's the mythic frame for what the Torah's heroic journey is all about. And just to make a last plug, there are going to be 26 paths. In addition to these, which are really the journey, the next phase is going to be heroic models, some of which I've mentioned and we'll speak more about in relationship to American Jewry in just a moment. And then, of course, there are all the qualities. Right? Every hero needs abilities. Right? Any Dungeons and Dragons players out there, right? You got to have your +5 sword and the magic shield and the spell book. Like there's humility, there's grace, there's courage. These are things that need to be developed, and they're actionable. Each and every one of these, I've made a commitment to everything that I produce has a practice that goes with it. Otherwise, it's not hora'ah. It's not practical instruction. So now back to American Jewry. If we have a definition of, and just to let you know, I'm going to go for another 10, 15 minutes, and I want to open up for questions and a conversation here, because that's about our target, right? So if our definition of heroism is mesirut nefesh l'ma'an tov, growing beyond limited sense of self for the goodness of creation, that applies to individuals and it applies to a community, right? So I want to consider a couple of the paths that the American Jewry might take, right? Considering the fact, again, that one way or the other, I believe things fundamentally changed on Simchat Torah for the Jews. Whether they changed for the world as a whole, maybe yes, maybe no. That's actually not my question right now. Although my sense is that, in the way that the Jews are just like everybody else, only more so, right? That it's inevitable that things change for the world as well. The first one is the Gibur, right? The Gibur as the rabbi who made the introduction said, right? The literally the mighty one, the quality, the essential quality of a gibor is hachra'ah, is to make a decision. Right? That's why, by the way, if you're familiar with the words of the sages that say, Ezehu Gibor, who is the mighty one? What do the sages say? Oh, Koveshet Yitzro, who can control their own urges. I mean, a Gibor in the Bible, right? The Giburim, the mighty ones of David, swung their spear over 300 dead. Right? That's fairly decisive, right? And the sages said yes, and there's a decisive nature of action which is control of self. Which, by the way, isn't to contradict, because of course they were well aware that any skilled warrior can control themselves, right? But there's many reasons for why they put the emphasis there. We're not going to dive into that for now. But what does this look like for American Jewry? Did you guys watch the Battle of UCLA? The Battle of UCLA, in my opinion, was one of the most important conflicts of the war that we're fighting right now. I can't tell you who won or lost. What am I talking about? Is that obviously you know that there have been these encampments on college campuses across the country. And again, really, I mean it when I say this. I have no dog in this fight about the politics right now. But the conflict that happened there was an act of gevurah, of attempt of making a hachra'ah, to be decisive, right? On both sides. I'm not advocating for vigilantism. What I'm pointing out to you is that one of the paths that lies ahead for American Jewry is decisive action. Because whether you see yourself in the Zionist camp or the anti-Zionist camp of the Jews, again, I'm talking about Jews right now, something you need to understand is that the thing that the anti-Zionist Jews understand right now that I don't know that the Zionists do is that it is a decisive moment. And that demands action. And I'm avowedly a Zionist. Just in case that was a mystery, right? But I have a lot of admiration for the understanding the anti-Zionist Jews have for the hachra'ah, that you need to be decisive. La hachriya is to basically tip the scales. They're tipping scales right now. And if I'm able to remove my emotion and analysis from it, which is not easy, I'm impressed by what they are managing to do. And so American Jewry needs to learn from this power. Because gvura, right, the sort of might, is not really actually a tool, right? Because I could push down on this table as hard as I want, and all I'm going to succeed is in breaking. I won't do it, right? It's at least one person flinch. Oh God, don't do it, right? All I'm going to do is succeed in breaking something, but I can put that on the back of a car and I can make it go forward. You understand? That's the difference between gvura and hachra'ah. Gvura is the ability to just put out force. Hachra'ah is when you put out force in a way which tips the scales. And that's one path that American Jewry needs to think about taking as individuals and as communities. How do we apply the force that we have in order to make the scales tip? Which scales? What force? Okay, that's part of the conversation. But it's a posture. I want you to think of these all as heroic stances, in a sense. What stance do you take, right? I do have to say, by the way, because I would be remiss, that making aliyah is also a tremendous hachra'ah. The problem there for American Jewry is it might be abandoning your story. Because that goes back to the question of the ma'an tov. Right? A hero is moser nefesh, and there's no question that moving to a foreign country, I can tell you, I'm raising my kids there, is a tremendous going beyond your limited self. The question for American Jews is that leman tov. I mean, I can give you my personal answer, but that doesn't matter. Because I don't have to make that decision for American Jewry. Right? And for some people, it will be good. For others, it won't. Will it be good for American Jewry? But remember, whatever that heroic stance it is, it's not just enough to be gevura, to be a gibur, to be mighty. It has to be for the sake of good. That's one, the gibur. Two, the magid. What's a magid? We all just went through Pesach. Storytelling. Now, I said before, and you know, this to me is a core identity, storytelling. Because the ultimate Jewish hero is the storyteller, right? The superpower Everybody here has superpower, right? So the Gibor's superpower is hachra'ah, they tip the scales. The superpower of the storyteller is tiferet. They put the pieces together. That's what a good storyteller does. They're able to put the pieces together. And the question is, who's going to put the pieces together of a story of U.S. Jewry, which is both beautiful and true? Now, why do I choose beautiful and true? Because tiferet as a word, does anybody know how you would define tiferet in English? It's a mess. It's usually translated as glory, majestic. That's a good one, right? Because there's an element of the malchut in there. Get it, beauty, but there's an element of truth and beauty in it. And what's so powerful about truth of Tiferet is it's the complexity of truth. One truth, many facets, right? It's truth in that sense of when I make a puzzle, there's one picture there, right? But it's made up of pieces, right? And so who is going to tell the story of American Jewry, which is both beautiful and true, and not in a simplistic sense? Because if it's true, that means in a simplistic sense, that means be over. Right? It has to be a story that actually has continuation. It's integrated in a life-giving sense into the Jewish story of whole, and of course into creation. Right? So that is, I'm missing a page. That's okay. I'm going to make it up from here. That's another very important piece. The Maggid takes all the diverse voices and is able to weave them together in a way in which none are lost, but rather than cacophony, we have symphony. Each finds their place. And one of the strengths of the Jewish people and one of its difficulties is its diversity. You know, it's funny, we talk all the time about we're one people, one God, one land, one Torah, 12 tribes. And if you paid any attention to our story, that whole 12 tribes thing, since Joseph's brothers beat him up, threw him in a pit, and sold him down to Egypt into slavery, it hasn't really gone all that well. Right? Like, civil war, and today we talk about the tribes in the state of Israel, right? President Ruby Rivlin made that language popular, but it's really quite true. It's a tribal society, right? And yet that seems to be an essential and not an accidental aspect. That's because we're people that also hold out for complexity within unity. That at God's perspective, everything is one. But from humans' perspective, everything can be in union, but not unity. We have to learn to bring the pieces together, and no one does that better than the storyteller. This is another, and by the way, not just for American Jewry alone, but for the Jews as a whole. What the story, the Jewish story that gets told in America is a very different Jewish story than the one that gets told in Israel. And it might be that it's time to speak a little bit louder about what this story is about. The third and final that I'll suggest to you before I wrap up and open for some questions is the Rofeh. Rofeh is the healer. We're people in need of tremendous healing. One of the topics I'm going to be speaking about when I'm in Palo Alto in a couple of weeks is this tension when I mentioned about Dor HaNitzachon, right? This generation of victory, which is a generation of Hachra'ah. What the generals mean and what my kids and their friends in the army mean is that we need to tip the scales. It's enough. This war needs to end in victory, and we're done. This is the generation to do it. Victory without healing is simply smashing your enemies. Is simply smashing your enemies. Right? And the cost of doing that without healing might be too high. The problem is the warrior can't be the healer as well. Life doesn't work that way. Every one of these models has their superpower. The Gibor is Machria, they tip the scales. The Maggid has this ability to put the pieces together, the Tiferet. And what's the power of the healer? Rachamim. Rachamim means mercy. I'm going to encourage you to translate it as compassion. Because mercy in our language has certain Christian connotations that don't belong to rachamim. But I want to tell you a secret. Every Hebrew word has a three-letter root. That's not a secret. I'm betting most of you know that. What's the three-letter root of compassion, of rachamim? No, the rechem. Resh, chet, mem. A rechem is a what? It's a womb. Rachamim is the ability to hold space for other to come to be. That's what compassion is. If you have a compassionate stance, you can hold space for someone else to come to be. That's what a womb literally is, right? And here's the trick. How do you do that? The womb is one of the strongest muscles in the body. Number one, you have to be able to hold. A doctor needs to be able to hold pain. They must be able to hold pain. You don't always hold pain nicely, right, doctor? Right? But you have to do it in a way which gives life. Because the womb may be the strongest muscle in the body, but the inner lining is the stuff of life itself. That is compassion. The ability to hold space, to hold pain in particular, with a strength which is unparalleled, but to do it in a way which actually gives life. Then you can heal. Right? And I happen to believe that this is the particular call which American Jewry needs to hear. For reasons which perhaps I can elaborate at another time, but I truly believe because of the historical experience of the Jewish people in America, because of the tremendous richness and diversity of the Jewish people in America, because of the experience of a life of peace and prosperity that the Jewish people in America have had for 200 years. Yes, with bumps and problems, nothing's perfect. Don't look for perfect. Remember, perfect is the enemy of good. Right? Because of that, I believe that American Jewry is uniquely situated to be the generation of healing, which can work together with a generation of victory to actually bring a future that we would want to live in together. So just to summarize, then I'll take your questions and comments, right? The definition of heroism in Torah is Mesirut Nefesh L'Ma'an Tov. Going beyond, growing beyond your limited sense of self for the sake of the goodness of creation. That's the mythic frame. It's our quest. I give it now to you. Go out and grow. And there are many ways in which you can be a hero. I've mentioned only 3. There are many others, right? And if you're interested in the details of the heroic journey, then I encourage you to take the sheet home, study what I've written here. You can go and look at the videos and the source sheets on the website. The goal here is to spread the word far and wide. So thank you very much for your attention and your focus. Happy to hear questions, comments. Challenges are even the best. And so I'll stop there and open the floor for people's voices. Thank you so much.
Just for the folks on Zoom, you don't mind repeating questions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So what are the action items for the healer?
What are the action items for the healer? First of all, we have to understand the source of pain. Right? The first posture in compassion is to hold the pain. Because if a person's in tremendous pain, you can't actually, help them all that much, right? Together with that, there's a certain aspect of healing which is also tiferet, in the sense of putting the pieces into right relationship, right? I think that we as a people are very broken. There's a response to a shattering blow. We can take October 7th as an example, but we're people of, if we go just back to the destruction of the Second Temple, right? That we've been taking blows and haven't really had time to catch our breath, except, in a few places along the way. Germany for a little bit, although that ended pretty poorly. Spain also, that ended pretty poorly. My hope for American Jewry is that that's not how it's going to go down, because I think American Jewry has way more agency, perhaps, than previously. So, but the piece that needs to be done there is, like I said, hold pain, put the pieces together, but to understand also that the response to a shattering blow is to clench. We take a posture which is defensive, which is reasonable, right? But often our immediate response to pain is maladaptive for the long term of healing, right? I injured my ankle 15 years ago, and unbeknownst to me, instead of actually dealing with it, my whole body was compensating and ended up actually blowing out the knee on the opposite leg. Why am I telling you this? Because that's the danger. The healing, you have to understand, how did the blow actually change who we are? How much of that is growth, and that's life? You move forward, you gain, etc. We talk about there's a quality there called nechama, right? Nechama means, somebody mentioned nechama. What does nechama mean? Well, that's one definition of nechama. What else? It could be comfort. What else does nechama mean? It can mean regret. Right? God says, "Nichamti," I regret that I created Adam. How does the same word mean comfort and regret? It because it doesn't mean either. It doesn't mean either. It means to change your perspective after the fact. Right? Regret is easy. I thought it was a good idea until I did it. I regret that one. Comfort, though, is what the healer needs to do. You need to transform the source of pain into a source of positive identity.
Your title, as it says, the Torah's heroic journey. Who are the heroes in the Torah? After all, it seems like every character who's identified has a number of human faults to go along with any sense of heroism.
So who are the heroes in the Torah? Because it seems like they're all flawed, right? So my first answer to you is that just as every hero has a superpower, so too every hero has what we call a kilkul. There's a corruption, there's a flaw. It's one of the most important aspects of the heroic model in Torah is that our heroes are always flawed. And that's for two reasons, because that's real, right? And it means we can learn from them. You guys, superheroes are really popular. I'm a Marvel comic book kid from and I've liked a lot of those movies. But you know why superheroes are popular? Many reasons. One of them is they offload the problem of heroism. Well, listen, if I could fly and shoot ray beams from my eyes, I would fight evil too. But what am I supposed to do? You see how that works? Whereas if my heroes are people who have identifiable flaws like me, I'm back on the hook. So what's the healing path? I'm going to repeat the question. What's the healing? And please tell me if I got it correctly. What's the healing path in relating to young anti-Zionist Jews? That's a fair statement.
They are acting.
Who believe they're acting on Jewish values. So the first answer is to remember the definition of compassion, right? That there's no way to be compassionate to someone if you can't hear them. If you can't hear them, you don't have to agree with them. Every physician to some degree is also a private investigator. Now, on one hand, you don't believe everything your patient is telling you. On the other hand, you have to listen to everything your patient's telling you. Otherwise, what are you going to work with? And that takes an enormous. You always have to have one eye inward when you're listening to people with whom you disagree. You understand? Because our reactivity is the biggest challenge to hearing others. That's the first step. The next step is also to accept the fact that there are perhaps different ways to push the Jewish story forward. And that in the end of the day, you could say God will decide, you could say history will decide, you could say that the mass of the people will decide, right? Now, you used a word which I think is very important, which is a violent opposition. And this is the place, I think, where the real healing needs to be done. Is it what needs to be unearthed is where does this really violent urge come from? Right? In language, in action. And I don't think there's a simple answer to that. But getting at that question is only going to happen once we learn to hold the space. And last, I'll say, is that there's no greater trap for a healer than the need to heal others. The need to heal, the great kilkul. I said every hero has their superpower. Every hero has their corrupt form. The corruption of the healer is ego. Right? That's why it's a trope, right? No offense to any surgeons in the room, but right? That's like the Gemara says, Tova Rofim leGehenna. The best of doctors is going to hell. Why? Because who's the real hero in the Jewish story? Sorry, real healer in the Jewish story. God is the first person called healer. Right? The Gemara says the permission was given to the healers to heal. And so therefore, when we speak to these young Jews, we need to be very wary of our need to fix them. Are the heroes in the Torah anti-heroes because they all have some quality of flaw? In brief, I would say that's not what my understanding of an anti-hero is. Although I think you said what an anti-hero is in your first sentence, which is it's someone whose behavior does not qualify as noble or heroic. We don't associate any of the qualities of heroism with it, but nonetheless, the end result, right? That's why the classic media anti-hero, like not media like in the real world media, but like fiction, it's Batman, right? He's doing a lot of rough stuff. I mean, he's basically a rich psychopath who's taking out his traumatic childhood on everybody in Gotham, right? But at the end of the day, at least people can sleep better at night because there are fewer crooks on the streets, right? He's an anti-hero. I don't think that's Torah is at all. Because there are three primary dimensions in which heroism manifests in Torah. The personal, where the ideal is healthy identity. Right? The interpersonal, where the ideal is kingship, like a collective of people who manifest their ability to manifest good. And ultimately, of course, there's God's perspective. And ideally, all three work together. Doesn't always happen. But no, I don't think that the Torah is looking for the anti-hero ideal. How do we move forward in healing in Israel without changes within the leadership structure? Because you see a failure of our leadership to take responsibility. The simple answer is that Israel is a functioning democracy, and the government we have is a reflection of the will of its people to the extent that any democracy is, and the government will change when the people change. I mean, I could give more grand visions. I mean, it's interesting that Rav Shmuel mentioned earlier Golda Meir. My understanding of history was that that's not how it went down. She was forced out by internal Mapai party politics. She wasn't actually going to let go of the steering wheel at all. Which is, by the way, you know, the expression in Israeli politics that you hold on to the steering wheel with both hands, and if they chop them off, grab it with your teeth. Right? So there's a political culture overall in Israel. We saw before this war its deterioration. And in my opinion, what I would like to see is a national effort toward writing a constitution, which, aside from whatever it actually looks like, I think that the process itself is the renewal of a social covenant, which is profoundly lacking within the country. So aside from the simple answer of, well, we're a democracy and the people will vote in and people will vote out, really, I think my answer to your question is that there needs to be a new social covenant. And the good news is that despite the profound failures of leadership that we saw before, during, and after October 7th, the level of heroism and engagement and just incredible activism of the populace from every front has, to me, been something beyond my wildest dreams. And I have two daughters, as I mentioned, in the Army, and many of my friends with their sons in combat, and my daughter's peers. And I can tell you that the sense that they are a generation which has a unique opportunity. They are shaping the country which they will come to lead. That does not often happen. The last time that happened in Israel was in 1973. And they are the generation still running the country. So you're about to see a profound shift. I want to tell you, it may not be the shift that American Jewry wants to see. Just need to be aware of that. But you're about to see a profound shift, right? And it's going to take another 5 to 10 years. How do we bring them together? I mean, I can think of a couple of ways, but one thing I would say is that as a participatory democracy, the number one thing that American Jews could do if they want to see a different country is move there and vote. I mean, I'll tell you, like, in particular, my progressive religious friends, I say to them, great. So there will be money for the reform movement and you know, women's section at the Kotel, et cetera, when you guys come and form a political party, and it's hardball power politics in Israel. But, you know, the nice part about it is everybody knows how to play. And that would be one answer. The other answers, I think, are more complex. And I think a commitment to the healing. the commitment to the healing. And like Rav Shmuley said in a conversation we were having earlier, even when the patient says, no, 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 I don't want, sometimes your commitment is to the healing and not necessarily to what you hear from the mouth of the patient. That's, I know, a dicey statement, but I'll stand by it. One more question.
We actually have, if there's a few more, it can take as many as.
Okay, great. I'm not in any hurry. Any other questions, comments, things people want to add? Sure. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I want to make a comment to the, about what's going on with the young students on campuses. My daughter is a freshman at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where there's a lot of Palestinian protests. In fact, there was a group of Palestinian protesters who entered her chemistry class this week. It was very upsetting to her. She had to leave. But I visited her a couple of weekends ago, and I went to the Chabad there, and there is the Jewish students are staying together. They had a mega Shabbat at Chabad, and on a 22,000 student campus, they had over 1,100 Jewish students show up to Chabad. And when I was at Shabbat there, you should just hear the ruach of the students. It was impressive. So there are probably anti-Zionist Jewish students, but when I went to visit my daughter in Santa Barbara, that's not what I saw.
You know, this is a very important point, which I think also answers the question of how to relate to the anti-Zionist Jews, which is you got to love it more. I think one of the most tragic impacts, you know the old joke that Hebrew school did in 2 generations what 1,000 years of missionaries couldn't accomplish, is they made young Jews hate Judaism. I mean, I know that's like maybe a mean thing to say in the world that I grew up in, but meaning we have to love it more. For those of us for whom Israel is precious, for whom Torah is precious, for whom Jewish community is precious, people are drawn to love, right? And as a parent, I can tell you this: people respect the values of those who they value the relationship, right? In all the difficulties of parenting I've had, the best advice I've always gotten is focus on the relationship. Oh, you disagree with the decisions your children are making? Ignore them. Focus on the relationship. You can't control them. You can control the relationship. Because in the end of the day, we reflect the values of those who we value our relationship with. So if you love something, love it more. And work to build that relationship, even as we say, ba'akifin, in roundabout ways. It doesn't need to be a relationship directly about Israel. It's one of the things I think it's a very difficult question that American Jewry faces today about where to draw the lines of community. It's not obvious to me where to draw the lines, but it's a very important and delicate question, because if you create a space in which a certain type of Jew isn't welcome, it's over with those people. Now, okay, that does happen in history. But I want to tell you something. In my personal belief, the people who make those decisions are going to stand before God's throne and answer whether it was a good one or not. And I don't see very many other questions of that type of weight that American Jewry are facing. Which isn't to say they shouldn't be made. Hurrah, hachra'ah. You have to make decisions, tip the scale sometimes. But just know what you're doing. Last call, questions, comments, things we want to add? Well, again, thank you all. You can be in touch with me there on the website if you have further thoughts. Feedback is welcome. And God bless everybody. Go out there and be heroes.
Thank you so much.